how secure is U.S. citizenship, really, especially, for folks who weren't born here?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a question a lot of naturalized Americans are probably thinking about right now, and it's definitely at the heart of our deep dive today.
That's right. We're looking at this significant new directive that came out from the U.S. Department of Justice. It was June 11th, 2025, signed by Assistant Attorney General Brett A. Shumate.
And this memo, it really seems to ramp up the government's focus on something called denaturalization, which is, well, the process of actually revoking U.S. citizenship from people who naturalized, who became citizens after immigrating.
It's today.
So our mission today is really to help you, our listener, get a handle on what this new policy means. We're talking about maybe 25 million naturalized U.S. citizens.
Yeah, it affects a huge number of people.
And we need to look at the legal side, the bigger picture, the context, and this, well, fierce debate that's already started.
Okay, so let's get into the memo itself. This June 11th directive, it explicitly calls denaturalization one of the Civil Division's top 5 enforcement priorities.
Top 5. So that's not just like a minor thing.
No, definitely not. It's a very clear signal, an elevated focus for the DOJ.
Right. So it's not just business as usual. What kind of offenses are we talking about here? How is the scope, expanding?
Well, the list is pretty extensive. You've got the things you might expect, like national security violations, terrorism, espionage, illegally exporting sensitive, tech.
Okay. Makes sense.
Then it goes into human rights violations, war crimes, torture, that sort of thing, and affiliations with transnational criminal groups, gangs, drug cartels.
Wow. What else? Anything that might surprise people?
I think so. It also hits on serious criminal stuff that wasn't disclosed during the naturalization process.
Yeah.
Felonies, obviously,
Right.
but also human trafficking, sex offenses, violent crimes.
Okay.
But then it also gets into white-collar areas. Fraud against government programs, think PPP fraud or Medicaid, Medicare fraud, and even large-scale financial fraud against, private companies.
It really does sound like a much wider net. And I assume things like getting citizenship through bribery or lying are still in there?
Oh, absolutely. Bribery, misrepresentation, corruption that's covered. Plus, cases that U.S. attorneys' offices refer over from ongoing criminal prosecutions.
But then there's this other category you mentioned, this kind of catch-all.
Yeah, that's the one. Any other case the Civil Division determines sufficiently important to pursue.
That seems incredibly broad. Doesn't that open the door to, well, potential overreach?
It certainly sounds sweeping, doesn't it? And yeah, that catch-all, plus the whole long list we just went through, it points to a much more aggressive stance than maybe we saw in the past, where the focus was often more narrowly on fraud or terrorism.
Right.
And we should remember, this isn't totally out of the blue. Denaturalization referrals actually shot up, I think it was 600% under the first Trump administration.
600%. Wow.
Yeah. And they even set up a dedicated denaturalization section back in 2020. So this memo, it feels like it's building on that trend, doubling down.
And we saw a pretty quick example of this policy in action right after the memo came out.
We did, yeah. Just 2 days later, June 13th. The citizenship of Elliot Duke, he was a UK-born U.S. military veteran, it was revoked.
Why? What was the basis?
He had apparently admitted to distributing child sexual abuse material, and crucially, this happened before he naturalized. So it's a pretty stark illustration of the kinds of cases they're going after now.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to the legal side. Because denaturalization, you said it's a civil action, not criminal. Why is that distinction so important?
It's absolutely crucial, especially for, due process. In civil cases, the government doesn't have to meet the same high bar for proof as in criminal cases.
Okay, so what's the standard then?
Usually it's either preponderance of the evidence, meaning just more likely than not, or sometimes clear, unequivocal, and convincing evidence. Both are lower than the beyond a reasonable doubt needed for a criminal conviction.
Yeah. So it's easier, relatively speaking, for the government to make its case.
Correct.
What other differences are there in terms of rights for the person facing this?
Well, this is huge.
Sure.
There's no guaranteed right to a jury trial in these civil proceedings. And critically, no right to a court-appointed lawyer if you can't afford one.
No court-appointed lawyer. That's significant.
Very significant. And to that, there's no statute of limitations.
Wait, none at all?
None. So the government can build a case based on things that happened decades ago related to how citizenship was obtained. Put all that together, and yeah, it raises some serious questions for legal experts about fairness and due process.
But there is a major check on this, right, from the Supreme Court, something called Maslin-Jack.
Yes, exactly. Maslin-Jack v. United States, a huge case from 2017. And it was unanimous, which is pretty telling.
Okay, so what did the court say? How does Maslin-Jack limit this denaturalization power?
The key word is materiality. The court ruled unanimously that you can't lose your citizenship just because you told some lie or left something out on your application. The government has to prove that the falsehood was material, meaning it actually mattered. It has to show that the lie made a difference in the decision to grant citizenship in the first place.
So like small mistakes or forgetting something minor or even telling a lie about something irrelevant, that's not enough.
Nope, not enough.
Yeah.
The government has to prove that if they had known the truth back then, they would have denied citizenship.
That sounds like a pretty high bar for the government to clear.
Oh, it is. It's an extraordinarily high bar. The ruling basically makes it, and I think the quote was something like, extraordinarily difficult, if not nearly impossible, except in the most serious cases, for the government to win a denaturalization case.
So the government can cast a wider net with this new memo, maybe investigate more types of cases.
Right.
But when it actually comes to taking citizenship away, the Supreme Court built a pretty high wall with Maslin-Jack. They have to prove that original decision was fundamentally flawed because of the lie.
Precisely. It's not just about finding any misdeeds later on. It has to tie directly back to the naturalization decision itself. And this high standard, it's clearly intentional. It's meant to prevent the government from misusing this power and to protect the security and permanence of citizenship for those who've earned it.
That makes sense. And can we just quickly clarify the difference between denaturalization and expatriation? They sound a bit similar.
Good point. Yeah, they're different. Denaturalization, like we've been saying, applies only to naturalized citizens. And it's all about how they got citizenship. Was the process flawed? Was there fraud or misrepresentation?
Okay. And expatriation.
Expatriation can apply to any citizen, whether they were born here or naturalized. But it requires proof that the person specifically intended to give up their U.S. citizenship. It's about voluntary surrender, not having it taken away because of an issue with how it was obtained.
Got it. So denaturalization is about the past process. Expatriation is about present intent.
You could put it that way, yeah.
No. This whole renewed push on denaturalization, it's kicked up a lot of dust, some really big concerns being raised. One of the main ones seems to be this idea of a two-tiered system of citizenship. What do critics mean by that?
Well, the argument is basically that this policy creates a situation where naturalized citizens face a risk that native-born citizens just don't.
How so?
Because certain offenses or lies told years ago could lead to a naturalized citizen losing their citizenship entirely, whereas a native-born citizen committing a similar crime wouldn't face that specific consequence. They'd face the criminal justice system, sure, but not the loss of their fundamental citizenship status.
So it creates a kind of vulnerability for naturalized citizens that others don't have.
Exactly, and that leads to this fear of a chilling effect.
A chilling effect, meaning?
Meaning that naturalized citizens might start to feel like their status is always sort of conditional, always potentially under review, and that fear could make them hesitant to, say, participate fully in civic life, or speak out, or exercise their rights as freely.
Yeah, I can see how that would create a sense of unease, this idea that your citizenship isn't quite as permanent as someone else's. It must affect how people feel about their place in society.
It's a really profound concern. And there are other related worries, too, like giving individual U.S. attorneys more discretion in bringing these cases. Could that lead to inconsistent application? Could it end up targeting certain communities more than others, maybe based on politics or, regional biases?
Has there been talk about political motivations?
Well, yes. In some public discussions, people have definitely raised the idea that this could be used or weaponized politically. You hear references to things like calls by some Republicans to look into denaturalizing Zohran Mamdani, the NYC mayoral candidate.
Right.
And then on the flip side, you also hear people bringing up past immigration questions surrounding figures like, say, Melania Trump or Elon Musk, kind of questioning where the lines are drawn in the public debate. It gets messy.
It does, and the stakes here are just immense. If someone is denaturalized, what actually happens? What are the consequences?
They're catastrophic, really. You lose the right to vote, you lose your U.S. passport, access to federal benefits. You basically revert to whatever immigration status you had before you became a citizen.
So you could become a lawful permanent resident again.
Yeah. Or potentially even become undocumented, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah.
And either way, you're immediately vulnerable to being placed in removal proceedings, meaning deportation. It completely upends your life.
It really brings home how crucial that initial naturalization process is and the application itself, Form N-400. What's the key takeaway for anyone going through that process or thinking about it?
Honesty and completeness are paramount. That Form N-400, it requires you to provide totally true and correct information, and you sign it under penalty of perjury.
So no fudging the details.
Absolutely not. And you need to know that even after citizenship is granted, the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, they still have the authority to go back and verify everything you submitted. They can check public records, do site visits, interviews, whatever.
So even things that seem minor or maybe happened a long time ago, they need to be disclosed up front. What are the common pitfalls?
Yeah, absolutely disclose. Criminal history is a big one. Even if offenses were minor or happened long ago or were supposedly expunged, you have to list them. Tax compliance is another area where problems can arise later if there was misrepresentation. The expectation is just total transparency during the application.
Okay. So wrapping this up, it seems like we're seeing this real tension playing out.
Definitely.
On one side, you've got the government saying, look, we need to enforce the law, protect national security, ensure the integrity of the citizenship process itself. These are stated priorities.
Right. That's the push behind the memo.
But on the other side, you have these really significant legal guardrails, especially that Maslanjak ruling from the Supreme Court.
Yeah. And constitutional principles protecting due process. Maslanjak really emphasizes that taking away citizenship is supposed to be this extraordinary remedy. It's meant for only the most serious cases where the original grant of citizenship was fundamentally flawed by a material lie or fraud.
So it leaves us, and you, our listener, with a pretty big question to chew on, doesn't it?
I think so.
In a world where there's more scrutiny, more data sharing, just more ways to look into people's pasts, what does it really mean to have secure citizenship today? And how do we, as a society, strike that balance between legitimate security needs and protecting the fundamental rights and the sense of belonging for all naturalized Americans?
That's the core tension, and it's something we'll likely be grappling with for a while.